Hey, welcome back to Leosophy. Got 4 questions this time, and so I don't go over as much as I did last time. Let me just jump right in. Why do people knock on wood? Okay, good question. Um, if you look at the belief structure in Scandinavian and Germanic paganism, they tended to believe, kind of, you could draw comparisons with Shintoism nowadays, that there were spirits within all manner of natural artifacts, trees, stones, rivers, waterfalls, and so forth. And people naturally, they would use wood to make furniture and make their homes. The thing about that is the spirits that lived within those trees, they didn't want to be made into tables. So you would end up with these vengeful beings inside your home. So imagine that you've got a table, and you wake up one morning and you tell whoever you're living with, "Hey, I'm gonna go fishing. Hope I catch a bunch." Well, if you have a vengeful spirit in your table and it hears that, it's gonna leave the table temporarily, fly out to the lake, scare off the fishes, and just mess with you. Just, the things that you're hopeful about, it will interfere with because it's mad that you turned it into a table. So what they would do is, when they were talking about something that they were hopeful about, they would knock on the wood while they were talking about it, and it would sort of deafen or shake up those spirits, and they couldn't hear what was going on. So you do something like that, and they can't impede whatever it is that you are hoping for. So that's the origin of that little ritual. Let's see. Next question. What's the next one? Boom, boom, boom. Are daddy long legs the most venomous spider? I hear that a lot. Like I don't think I can go 2 or 3 months without somebody mentioning that. No, they aren't. In fact, that's an old wives' tale on several counts. Let me start with the term daddy long legs, actually, because that's a whole other issue. In North America, we refer to opiliones as daddy long legs. And people often think that they are spiders, but they aren't. They are a completely different kind of arachnid. They are arachnids, at least, and they do have chelicerae, like I mentioned in a previous video, and they have 8 legs and so forth. But they are not spiders. So right out the gate, that's wrong. Also, in other parts of the world, they say, or they use different terms for daddy long legs, or it's associated with different animals. Like I know I think it's Australia, they refer to cellar spiders as daddy long legs. So yeah, don't use common names with certainty, because a lot of times they don't actually apply to the same species everywhere you go. It's kind of an issue. So opiliones, that's the proper term for what I'm assuming you're from North America. Opiliones, that's the term that we use for what people call daddy long legs in North America, and they're not spiders. So I mean, I already mentioned that, but still bears repeating. And they have a peculiar diet. Like some of them are omnivorous, and many of them are scavengers, and some of them are predatory. So they do use venom, the same as all uh, arachnids, to break down their prey. Digestion occurs on the outside, but there's I don't believe there's a single opilion on Earth, and that's counting thousands of species most likely, that not only would be capable of biting a person, but whose venom would actually have an effect on them. So, to answer your question, no, that is an old wives' tale. Day long legs are not spiders, and they're not, in the case of humans, venomous. So, yeah, you have nothing to fear from them unless you're an incredibly small animal. Like if you were a mite or a gnat, then you might be in trouble. Okay, question number 3. Oh man, 4 minutes in. I'm batting 1,000 right now, not ranting. Why aren't dogs different species? Okay, you mean why are different dog breeds separate species? Um, that one's going to be a little harder to answer, because the hardball definition, what people often use to describe whether something is a species or a breed or a race or a subspecies, all those different criteria. The thing that people usually use to say whether something's a species or not is whether or not they can produce fertile hybrid offspring. And of course, in the case of dogs, you could mix a husky with a lab and then take that and mix it with a corgi and take that and mix it with a dachshund and take that and mix it with a chihuahua. Just ad infinitum. You could just keep going with that. So there's no fertility issues between them. So even though there's these huge cosmetic differences, they're really not that different in any other sense. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, if you go to a warehouse, there's different sizes and shapes of boxes, but they're all boxes. There's a lot of different sizes and shapes of dogs, but they're all dogs. And if you look at their internal anatomy, their behavior, there's just not a lot of variation. It's all cosmetic. Couple that with the fact that you can breed literally any dog breed together and produce fertile offspring, it becomes a relatively apparent answer that they are not separate species. But then things get kind of muddled when you start talking about things that have been separated geographically for a very long time and are cosmetically different and physiologically different and behaviorally different, but they can produce fertile offspring. Then it becomes a bit of an issue. Case in point, the Poecilothera genus of tarantulas, the Brachypelma genus of tarantulas, and I think the Grammostola genus of tarantulas. Within that genus, they all can produce fertile offspring indefinitely. It's not an issue. And then if you look at, in the case of horses and donkeys, mules are sterile, but every once in a blue moon, a hinny, which is the product of a stallion, a male horse, and a jenny, a female donkey, sometimes they are fertile. So that's the thing about taxonomy. That's the thing about drawing lines in the sand with regard to animals, is anything organic like that, anything that evolves and changes and has individual genetics, that separate it from every other individual, you're gonna get variations, and those variations, it's kind of harder to compartmentalize. In fact, that's one of the things I like about taxonomy, is because it's not as cut and dry as, say, identifying something as an organic compound or an inorganic compound, or a metal and a non-metal. Those things are really cut and dry. But in the case of taxonomy, I mean, things get kind of murky. It's interesting, but it can also be a problem. So generally speaking, when you talk to somebody about whether something is a species or not, the go-to criteria is whether it produces fertile offspring or not. But that's really not 100% the case, and it's more subjective, unfortunately. I hate to say that, because I mean, when people discuss the hard sciences, you want there to be a very definitive answer, but it's really not. So I've actually gotten in real arguments with people regarding that, because a lot of times people will draw a line expressly at that point, and you can't. You can't. Otherwise, we would have to remap a lot of, like we mentioned before, those tarantulas. You'd have to remap what they are. You'd have to, like, for example, Brachypelma albopilosum and Brachypelma vagans. You'd have to redefine them, because they're capable of producing fertile offspring indefinitely. You'd have to say, well, no, it's Brachypelma and then a species name and then subspecies or variation, because the species definition doesn't apply to them, even though they're considered by modern science to be separate species. Hope that answers the question. Last question. That's another complicated one. What is the difference between a religion and a cult? Actually, I have my own view on that one too. Let me start by saying what the standard view is. The standard view is, I think, extremely unrefined. It's not a very good answer. One of the chief differences by modern definitions between a cult and a religion is cults are fairly modern. Okay, what does that mean? Anything's modern depending on when it was founded. I mean, everything started at a certain point in time. It sounds almost as though the real claim to fame is pre 19th century is a religion, and post 19th century it's a cult, which that's nonsense. That's a silly way to base something. Um, my view of things is different though. And another modern criteria I think is if it's harmful for the individual. Well, again, that's pretty subjective. What's harmful for an individual? My criteria would be three things. The first would be, how important is the leader of this belief system compared to the rules that they lay down and the spiritual path that they claim is important. Um, so, for example, religions tend to focus on an idea, a deity, a prophet, rules for living, things like that. Whereas cults tend to focus on an individual, like one person. And I know that some of you might be thinking, well, prophet is an individual. Yeah, but generally speaking, whenever somebody is a prophet of, what I would consider to be a religion rather than a cult, they take they're superseded by whatever deity they are a prophet for. And as such, they're not the most important figure by a very, very wide margin. Um, so, case in point, Jonestown. That all the bearings of a cult. You've got the leader's the most important person. If you ask somebody, like, what are the tenets of the Jonestown religion? Nobody thinks about it because what matters is the leader, the person in charge, Jim Jones. I think his name was Jim Jones. Uh, then also look at that person's place in that society. There was no deity. There was no idea. Technically, I think he said that he served the God of Christianity, but it, like I said, he superseded all of that. The focus was on him. And then you look at this is the second. This leads into the second criteria: the relationship between the ruling class or ruling group of people and the laymen or the lower group of people. Is there an enormous disparity, especially with regard to rules? See, all belief systems have rules. Do the rules apply across the board? Do they get stricter as they go up the hierarchy or more lax? That's very important. In my opinion, a cult hierarchy, rules get more lax the higher you go up. For example, Shakers. Your average person does not consider them to be a cult. I don't think they fit the modern definition of a cult. But they fit my definition of a cult, absolutely. 100%, for me, it's not even debatable. Shakers were a cult. Mother Ann, who founded that religion, her followers, they were not allowed to eat for prolonged periods of time, to a point that many of them became emaciated. She was jailed for cruelty. They would abuse their bodies, beat themselves, things like that. They all took vows of celibacy and so forth. But then you look at her lifestyle. See, if she led the same lifestyle, I'd say, well, that's a religion. But she didn't. She ate lavish food. She had a husband whom she was able to have sex with, even though all the other Shakers were celibate, which is why they're extinct. There's like two left, I think, because they relied on like adoptions and foundlings and things like that, because they couldn't reproduce. Let's see. Yeah, she would eat good food. She had a husband. She had sex. She slept on a nice comfy bed while her followers slept on the floor. Those are important things to look at. Like, for example, I don't consider the Roman Catholic Church to be a cult. Not because it's older or any nonsense like that, but because, one, the focus isn't on whoever's in charge, case in point, the Pope, and two, and this is more important, if you look at the way the clergy has to live, many of them have vows of poverty. Many of them have vows of celibacy. Laymen don't. If it was the other way around, I would absolutely consider them to be a cult. If your average Joe who was Catholic had to be celibate or had to be impoverished, couldn't make a certain amount of money, couldn't ever engage in sexual congress with anyone, etc., but your average cardinal could, that's red flag right there. The idea that there should be a disparity in rules and privileges and quality of life between a ruling hierarchy and the people under them, That's the biggest, for me, indication that something is a cult. That's what you really need to look at. And that leads to the third one, which is, are there a strict level of orders, levels, privileges, etc.? Like, think about how a lot of social media is run, or clubs, secret groups, things like that. There's sort of an hierarchy where, if you're in for 6 months, or you get this much done, then you get, a gold star. If a religion has those qualities, that's a red flag that they are a cult, because there shouldn't there's a huge difference between people taking vows and becoming part of a clergy or part of something like that, priesthood, monkhood, and so forth, and levels within the lay society. Like, for example, imagine, let me think of a religion that seems, to my perspective, normal. Um, Methodists. I just pulled that one out of a hat. Methodists. Okay, Methodists have preachers and ministers, and I think deacons, and then they have lay people, right? If within the lay people there was a silver group and a gold group and a platinum group, and it was very important, and you could tell, which Methodist was gold or silver or platinum by a badge or something that they wore or something like that, and they all had different um, rights and privileges. Like, for example, silver. If you're a silver Methodist, you can pay tithes to the church, and you're expected to attend regularly and things like that. But you can't have meat on Fridays. It's just part of the way things are. You really need to donate more money and be in it longer, and maybe get some new converts before you can actually eat meat on Friday. Now, gold, they can eat meat on Friday, but they're only allowed to have 2 children per household. It's very important, because you don't want too many, like, gold members, you know, clogging up the voting of the church. It could be a problem. We need people who are more loyal than that. Platinum members, on the other hand, they can have as many kids as they want, and they can have meat on Friday, and they get to vote on key decisions that the other groups really aren't allowed to vote on. More important things. There's 2 different kinds of voting meetings. The ones on Wednesday. You see where I'm going with this? You're creating this unusual disparity, this unusual series of ranks that encourage people to both be in longer and be more loyal to the church. It reminds me of actually what a lot of the video games, particular online video games, use, which is called a Skinner box. Psychologist Skinner, he discovered that he did a lot of messed up stuff. That's like a whole other video. But one of the things he realized is that certain kinds of positive reinforcement can actually get people to forego things that they need, or want otherwise. Like, for example, he took a baby monkey, I think it was a rhesus monkey, and he determined, through experimenting on this little monkey, that a baby monkey will forego food if they have something warm to sort of snuggle against, because they feel more secure. So a baby monkey will actually starve, because they prefer comfort and security over a even more important need by normal standards, by how we gauge what an animal needs. And you see this with a lot of clubs, a lot of online games, fake currency. If you do this for 14 hours straight, you'll get a reward, and so forth, grinding, things like that. If this is applied to a spirituality, it's pretty much guaranteed to be a cult. So those are my 3 criteria. A disparity between the ruling class and the lower class, a focus on the leader or management, and then lastly, sort of gradients, and where different privileges apply to different people within that group. That's my definition. It's not the hard definition, but I think my definition is better. That's why I came up with it, and it's based on my own observations. And if anybody disagrees or finds flaws with that, I would love to hear it, because it's something that I'd like to hammer out the problems with. So I'm really glad I got that question, because it's something I've actually been mulling over for a while. I hadn't thought about it in a while, but Yeah, now that's kind of at the forefront of my consciousness now. Anyway, that answers all the questions. Oh my God, I actually made it under 20 minutes. Thanks. Try and like and subscribe, and remember to ask questions and so forth. Okay, I gotta stop.